Hi, everyone, and welcome to orgCommunity's webinar series. This is our last webinar of the year, and we are so glad you're here. My name is Emily Hendershot, and I serve as orgCommunity's Managing Director. orgCommunity is a vibrant network of association executives dedicated to shaping the future of associations. Through innovative events and peer-to-peer counsel, orgCommunity supports executives in growing their leadership skills and advancing the business goals of the organizations they serve. And we have fun. Our next one-day event is Innovation Summit on February 20th in Schaumburg, Illinois. Earn CAE credit for attending. After the webinar, you'll receive a link to your CAE certificate as well as the replay. Feel free to reply to contact me for more information about our community and how to join our inner circle. Today's webinar is How Associations Are Enhancing Member Value with Data Analytics with Gravitate Solutions. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to send them via the chat.
Thanks, Emily, and I have to say thank you for orgCommunity for asking us to present on this webinar today. And with many great webinars, I thought I would start with a thought leader in the industry on analytics. In fact, the very first one is the one that I actually enjoy the most. Merely measuring something has an uncanny tendency to improve it. I've seen that throughout my career, even long before I was ever at Gravitate. And I think we probably can all agree, if we're not measuring something, it's really hard to set goals and align your organization. And that's particularly the real value that data analytics brings to associations when they're looking at their data, is that it gives them the ability to analyze that data, to measure it, and to really trust it. That's one of the challenges many organizations have, is that they might not even trust their data. So a big part of implementing an analytics solution is also getting to a point where you really trust your data. So we have two big topics today. The first one is that are really focused on enhancing member value. The first one is around member engagement scoring and how that can allow the organization to better understand the member, and in turn then be able to better serve them. And the second one is a term that maybe many of you have heard less about, is member-facing analytics. And that's the concept of actually taking analytics and pushing them out onto your website or onto a mobile app and providing them directly to your members. And some of you may have done this in a little bit of a one-off fashion, maybe just pulling data to your website through an API. But this is going much, much deeper than that, and doing it in such a way where you can provide them deep information and really show a great deal of transparency to them as you see appropriate. One of the things that I wanted to do, though, before we got into those two topics, is I wanted to bring everybody to a certain basic level of understanding about data analytics. So I want to talk about a couple of terms that you may hear either Brandon and I mention, or other people in the industry mention, that may help you better understand when they're talking about it. The first is a data lake. It's a new technology that many organizations are using in the data analytics industry. It's a more modern technology than the data warehouse. It allows us to store the data in unstructured and structured data, meaning structured data would be numbers, unstructured would be text and other information like video and things like that. And these data lakes are built on big data technology, so they can contain and harness and handle a lot of data. So data is not a challenge like you might have with a SQL database. You don't have to worry about it slowing down because it has a lot of data. And so the data lake is also very flexible, whereas in the old data warehouse you had a scenario where you had to really pre-plan the types of visualizations or analyses you wanted to do, and you would create something like a cube that was rather complicated to construct. The data lake stores the data in its raw format and then can be used as such, and as I said, it's very flexible. The second thing I wanted to mention, and very important point as it relates to data analytics, is data blending. That is the concept of taking data from all your important technology tools and bringing the data all together into one place. In other words, put it into the data lake. And that means bringing data from, say, your association management system or your content management system, your CRM system, your LMS, your email marketing tool, your community, all those key tools that you use to run your business. The idea is to bring them into the data lake and blend them together so they essentially become one data source, and then you can do some really interesting things with them. You might hear the term dimensions. It's kind of a bit of a fancier term for filters. It really describes an attribute, all the characteristics. You can think of something as simple as like join date, and you could have that as a filter. So that's a dimension that you would set up on the data, and then you would use that later as a filter, and that's how you get and inspect the data. And then the part of data analytics that most people understand, and the most common thing is ultimately the dashboards or visualizations that you would have while you're tracking your goals, and where you would be displaying the insights visually. So that's the part that everybody understands as data analytics. Okay, so here's an example. Probably the most common example of data analytics are key performance indicators. Oftentimes that they're progressed against a goal. So in this case, we're showing the number of members against our goal. And fortunately, we're at 101%. So that's a very common KPI that an association would have. Another one is where you might be comparing this year against last year against other years. And in this particular case, we're looking at weeks out in registration, and you're and comparing it year over year. Building that in a typical SQL database is very, very hard to do, but actually is quite easy to do in a data analytics platform when you have the data maybe coming in snapshots. And so it's very, very easy to use. So these are just some simple examples of some KPIs and some of the most common analytics that people have. And if you're really lucky, you will have the ability to look at analytics on your phone. So you might want to look for an analytics platform that's fully responsive, so that you can see it on your phone, your tablet, your PC, but you can carry it with you and have access to your data at any time. Okay, so my first case study I want to talk about, and this really relates to the member engagement, is the trade association I used to work at. I was there for 3 years. A trade association in Washington, D.C. I was the number 2 person there before I joined Gravitate in March. And as you can see, we were a medium-sized association. We had, but we did try to do a lot of innovative things. And one of the things that we really wanted to do is have a better understanding of our members, and then be able to use that and provide them more value. So the challenges for 340B Health were probably not unlike many of the challenges that all of you have at your organization. We were trying to increase our retention. We were trying to accelerate our membership acquisition. We were, of course, trying to grow our annual meeting. We were also trying to improve our government relations. We were a trade association, so we did a lot of advocacy and lobbying. So we were very interested in how we were working with leaders in the industry across the country, both at the high end and at the lower level, and getting activity there. So those were all areas that we had challenges that we were hoping that data analytics would help us solve. There were certain things that we needed to understand and learn about our organization and ourselves, though, before we could really embark on a data analytics initiative. So we really needed to first identify what source systems we wanted to pull data from. We had to determine if the data was clean, and what was the best way to clean it, and then keep it clean after that. We had to determine how to blend the data. I had talked a little bit about blending, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. And then we had to really get into the concept of scoring the engagement, and coming up with a good methodology to do that, as well as decaying the scoring. So clearly, I don't want to give credit to a member for an activity they did a long time ago. So the scoring has to start to decay at some point in time. So these are some things that we needed to understand about our data and about our organization before we could really proceed. So at my organization, we had a number of different systems that were running. And we decided the three most important systems were our AMS system, IMAS, our email marketing solution Informs, and our private community, which was HireLogic. We had other data systems that we were using, including we were pulling a lot of public data from Medicare and Medicaid that we were very valuable as well. But we decided to chunk up the project and do those three systems first, and then that we would come back later and start getting at the other data and do even more interesting analytics. We also had to think about the cleanliness of the data. So one of the things that we did is we created a data stewards team. We tried to pull somebody from each of the main parts of our organization, membership, conferences, the GR team, and look at our data and look for areas where it might have had some challenges. And we did some data cleanup, but we also made some decisions of not to clean certain things up that we thought would be easier to take care of after we put the analytics system up. It would help us identify some of that data. We wanted to evaluate which systems we already had a common ID. Fortunately, it was good that we had our member ID from IMAS in the HireLogic system because we had the SSO running, and then we had the emails that tied the email system to our AMS, so we had good common IDs to use to connect the systems. And of course, we had to put some procedures in place to really consistently pay attention to the data. And so what we basically did is we agreed that once a quarter, this data steward team would gather together and bring any new data issues that might have cropped up, and then we'd figure out how to deal with them. And as I'm sure some of you had, one of the most common ones for us was that people would go on the website and they would create a new record without searching or something, and suddenly now you have two John Smiths, and so we just had to learn to work with that. So then we had to talk about blending. So we got those systems. Of course, I'm showing an example of 4 here, but it was really 3 systems we were dealing with: the association management system, the email marketing tool, and the social. And this gives you a rather simple example of what data blending looks like. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create one very large data set that has all the rows and all the columns of all the data, and so that you can start comparing data in your AMS with dimensions or filters that are in the other systems. And so suddenly you can say, boy, I would like to look at members who have only had tenure of less than 3 years, who clicked on a particular email and made a post in our system. So that's the kind of value you have once you've blended the data together when you're inspecting the data that you don't currently have when you don't have the data all together. The other thing that we'd like to do when we're bringing data together is to do some transformation of it to improve it. And I kind of mentioned the tenure. It's nice to take like join date and change it into a tenure so that when you're looking at the data and somebody is evaluating it, you can drill into the data based on criteria that you have. So you could say, I only want to look at the people with 4 to 6 years of tenure. And if you have to do that with Boolean logic, it just makes it more complicated for people who aren't comfortable with that. If they can just pick that field, they can use it. So when you set up a data analytics platform, you can add these new columns into the data analytics tool and make it available. This is not data that you would move back into your AMS. It stays in the data analytics tool. Another place that's always a good one is if you happen to be an organization that's tracking age, put it in a generation, create a new field for that. So then you can always inspect it based on that. And you don't have to do any checking. A person doesn't have to have a different interpretation of who a baby boomer is. So it just solves that. Everybody in your organization is looking at the data the same way. Another big one is member type. I imagine that you've had many times at your organization where you get people who come up with different answers for how many members you have. And that's because they don't know when they're running a query or a report that they have to specify that someone's a regular member, they have a status of active, they've paid, or they're still within the grace period, and maybe you have another criteria like 5 years of history. And so they make that mistake and they forget one of those, and so they get a different answer. So when you bring the data into the data lake, it's always recommended to transform that, put the logic in, and actually mark whether a person's a member or not. So that way, when somebody's inspecting the data in the data analytics tool, everybody is dealing with the same set of who's a member and who isn't a member, and you don't make any of those mistakes. So then once you get the data all blended together, now you have to start thinking about, well, how do I score all that data? So what we did was these are different activities that happen in these systems. So we have the higher logic, we had the informs, the email, and of course the one in the back is the IMUS. These are all different activities. So there's not that many activities in email. You basically have clicks and opens, and so we obviously the opening an email to us was much less valuable than clicking, so we gave 1 point for opening an email and 5 points for clicking on one. You can also see that we have a term of 3 months on that. So in other words, we are going to decay or expire that value or that point after 3 months. We're also putting we were putting a term or a cap on the amount of points you can get from that particular thing in a month. So maybe if a person clicks on 10 emails, in our particular case, we didn't care. You may decide that you do care about that, but we wanted to make sure that emailing didn't gather too many points as compared to other activities that were far more valuable. Then we went to the higher logic activities, and we were really focused on, did they post something, did they repost something, did they put something in the library? Obviously, if they created their bio the first time, we gave them some credit for that. And then, of course, then you move on to the data in your AMS. And, maybe for a webinar, you would give 50 points. For your annual meeting, you could give, in our case, we're giving 200. Attending our fly-in was 200. We would give things like 400 or 500 points for someone who would call a member of Congress. These FACES things, we're actually creating videos with our providers and our patients. If a hospital could convince a patient to do a video, that would be very, very valuable. So you do all that, and then what happens is you start to now aggregate all the data. And at 340B Health, we were a trade association, so we cared obviously what the hospitals were up to, but we wanted to be able to track engagement at the individual level. We wanted to track it at the hospital level, and then hospitals were part of health systems, so we rolled it up another level. So we tracked engagement for all 3 of those levels. And the other thing we did is for the hospitals and health systems, we always had it be an ongoing engagement score. It just continued on and on and on. We didn't end it at some point in time because we always wanted to know at a particular day and time, what is their score? Now, for individuals, we handled it a little differently. What we did in that case is we ended it at the end of each year, because what we wanted to do is we wanted to gamify it a little bit and encourage people to get more engaged. So at the end of every year, we would set their score back down to 0 and start them again. And what we found is that we would get people calling us at the end of the year asking us how they could, what else could they do to drive their scores up? Because the folks who got the highest scores, we brought them to our annual conference. The ones with the very high scores, we actually paid for the conference, but we would bring the most engaged up on stage and congratulate them. And, people like to be obviously recognized for their good work. So by doing that, we actually helped drive their engagement up by getting them more involved. And they knew what their scores were because we pushed that information out to them through our website in their mobile app into something we call member-facing analytics, which I will be talking about shortly. But so you could even send that out by a letter, but the point is that sending that information to them was valuable because it got them more and more engaged. So then what did we end up with? Once we did all this with the analytics, we could start tracking what the engagement scores were for everyone in the organization. So First of all, we would know what the overall engagement across the entire organization was, one number adding up every engagement for the month. So we could tell whether engagement across all of our members was going up or going slightly down. And, quite frankly, we would see engagement growing as we got closer to the annual meeting, other events, and then drop off a little bit afterwards. But our hope was that over time, it would have a trend line of going up. The other thing we did is we bucketed the engagement into these things of no engagement, low, medium, and so forth. And by bucketing them that way, then you can actually inspect the data based on that. So you can say, I only want to look at medium engaged people who opened emails and read something in our community. And so you can inspect the data in such a way where you're just targeting them. It actually becomes a special persona for them and using that to your advantage. And so then what we would try and do is we would try and determine what was the key difference between someone who is medium engaged versus someone who is highly engaged. And so then we would try and encourage those people to do those other activities to move them from one category to another. So it helped direct our behavior. Now, the easiest thing that the engagement scoring did for us is, of course, it identified who was our most engaged people, and hospitals, of course. Now, that wasn't what was most interesting, though. What was most interesting was who our least engaged members were. Those were obvious retention challenges, and who our most engaged non-members were, because that told us exactly who our acquisition targets were. And we even had a nice surprise along the way, which we found out who, by having that engagement score, it made it possible for us to figure out who was a good board candidate. When we would get, a couple times a year, somebody would leave the board and we would have to get a new board member. And the way it worked at our organization is hospitals got to nominate, and we usually got 65 to 75 nominations each time a new board member seat became open. And it used to take us about 3 weeks to do the research to figure out who was a good candidate, because one of the things that was really important to us is that we wanted board members who are highly engaged in the organization. Well, just by applying the engagement scoring, we were able to eliminate the bottom 65 and just stick with the final 10. And because we wanted most engaged, so we took our top 10 most engaged, and then from there we did the additional evaluation on them. What universities did they go to? Where did they do their residency? What other associations that they were part of? But we took a process that would generally take 3 weeks to do, and we brought it down to about 3 days, to the point where we could give the board a slate for them to look at and pick a new board member. So real nice value for the organization. And of course, the value for the member themselves is that you have all this information about them, and you can start pushing content to them, whether they're in invitations to webinars or to certain sessions or content on your website, based on, what their engagement score, and based on the activities that shows that they're most likely to find interesting. Okay, so I'm going to change topics a little bit and talk about member-facing analytics. And so the first question is, what the heck is that? So I've done a little graphic here to kind of give you a sense of what that is. So again, always starting with source systems. I've got 4 different source systems here now, a couple of the same ones, but then another example could be using, say, the Nimble AMS or Qualtrics. Those could be source systems. And of course, just like we were talking about before, you would bring that to a data lake, and you would blend that data all together so it becomes very valuable. And then ultimately, once you have that, you can you can do it the normal way where you're looking at the analytics yourself, but you can project those analytics into your website or into a mobile app, and which is very valuable. So in this particular case, what you do is you create the analytic look and feel, or the interface, in the standard environment that you would normally look at yourself, and then you through a couple of steps, you then place it into your website. And The nice thing is that you can just show them the analytics that you want them to see, or you can actually take it one step further and even make filters available for them. Now, again, some of you would probably have said, well, I've done some of this before by just creating a web page and using an API and providing some of that to our members. But, you know, that's a very, generally a very costly, time-consuming method, and it generally isn't very flexible. So once you've embedded these analytics into your site, you can change them, you can add more of them, and there isn't, you know, it's very easy to do, very quick and very cost effective. So that's basically what member-facing analytics are, is basically showing these analytics to your members, being very transparent on the data that you want them to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about an association where we did such a just this type of thing, the National Association for Healthcare Quality. Great organization in the Chicagoland area, and they had a great vision on using data analytics. So they have on their website, you can go and look at it, it's on their homepage, they have a self-assessment that they're asking their members to do. And the members go in and do a self-assessment. It's basically a survey. Once they've completed that survey, that data gets pulled into the data analytics platform, in this case, our platform, Nucleus. It gets blended together with other data, and then all of a sudden you have the ability for that data to be inspected. And so obviously, NAHQ themselves uses the data internally, but what they really want is they want their members to be able to look at this data and to be able to compare themselves to other members. And their members, from what I understand, find that very valuable. So first and foremost, this gives you an example of what they see. So once a member has done the survey, they then can go in and look at how that they score against other respondents who've taken the exam or taken the survey. And then they came up with this concept of they created the dimensions of all the different areas where somebody is going to be a professional in their area. And then the survey helps the participant see how they compare, whether they're a novice or they're very proficient or they're an expert, so they can see where they score on that continuum. So they make this available to their members, so by logging into their system and going to their members only area. And then what gets really interesting is NAHQ took it one step further, which is they then looked at this as an opportunity to monetize this data. And they said, they basically worked with the members and said, look, if you'd like, by buying a subscription, you can not only look at how your scoring is, but you can now look at how you compare at very specific areas against other members. So for example, and as you can see on the right side of the screen, there's now filters that the member can check. So for example, they could say, I'd like to compare myself against a C-suite level person, or maybe somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years. I want to compare myself so I can help determine what steps I need to take in my career to be able to then be ready to move up to that next level. So it gives them that ability to evaluate and inspect the data. Okay, so I am going to, at this point, move it on to the demonstration. And before I turn it over to Brandon, I just want to let you know that he is demoing live systems. And so the type of performance that you will see is the kind of performance you'd expect if you were running our platform, Nucleus. So he's showing how they solved real problems. So he'll be going through the data that's in 340B Health. He'll be going through NAHQ's system, and he may show you a couple other ones as well. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Brandon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. So as Rob mentioned, I'm going to be walking you through the examples that we just covered in the PowerPoint. So where I'm going to start is actually with 340B Health site. And keep in mind, there are a number of other areas that Nucleus in particular can help you analyze across your organization. I'm mostly going to be talking about the two examples that Rob covered a little bit earlier in the presentation today. So first and foremost, I like to kind of explain the way that the system works and how the navigation works so that as I'm going throughout the presentation today, it makes a little bit more sense to you where I'm going and what I'm clicking on. So as we take a look at 340B Health site here, the first thing that you'll notice is that up here in the top of the screen is a navigation menu. And so this allows us to open up what we call carousels within Nucleus, and these are really designed to be the different ways that our clients are choosing to organize their analytics within Nucleus. So for 340B Health, you'll notice they have a health systems area, hospitals, corporate partners, different types of members that they're analyzing. You'll also notice from the engagement level, they have organizational engagement, individual engagement, champions engagement. So they're looking at it on a variety of different levels. And then as we scroll down, you'll see some conferences and some higher logic activity down here at the bottom of the screen. Now today, since we're mostly be focusing on member engagement, I'm gonna walk you through what those particular carousels look like. And starting up the screen here, the first thing that you'll notice that we're tracking is their engagement over the last 5 months. And so this is basically just showing us the number of engagement points that have come in through the number of systems that they're linking to Nucleus here. And so keep in mind, again, that's IMIS, Higher Logic, and Informs. And so what it essentially allows us to do is track the overall organizational health from an engagement standpoint. So obviously the goal is to either grow or maintain the same level of your engagement here. And you can see they're performing pretty well in terms of their overall or their average engagement. So the next card that you'll see here, and again, the reason this call is called a carousel is that there are a number of different cards here, and these are designed to be simple question, simple answer type of scenario, but the reason it's called a carousel is as I scroll to the right, there are more cards for me to be able to go ahead and analyze. So the next card that you'll see here is engagement levels by org count, and this is essentially allowing us to break down our organizations into a number of different engagement spans. So you'll notice that there are low organizations, medium organizations, high, and very high. You'll also notice this big red bar here, and one thing that you should keep in mind is that because new hospitals aren't generally being created every day, 340B Health is in the unique position of also being able to analyze their non-member engagement. And so here that is also taking into account their non-members. And so basically this will allow us when we dive down deeper via the Explore link to either filter those out, take a look at them a little bit more in depth. But one of the things that this allows you to do is one, take a look at, okay, these are my organizations who have not even opened an email from us. So it's a very, red flashing warning flag. We need to figure out how to engage with these organizations more effectively. The next thing that you'll see is that as we kind of take a look at these buckets, they kind of shrink as they go up to the engagement levels. But one thing that organizations can do with engagement scoring is take a look at what are the people in the medium bucket done that the people in the low bucket haven't done, right? And how are the ways that we can effectively encourage them to go ahead and start taking the steps to get them into a higher engaged category here. We're also taking a look at engagement scores from a variety of different analytics here. So here you can see we're diving down into dimensions by state or by geographic region. And so that's one other thing we're taking a look at. So when I click Explore and dive down deeper into this visualization here, one of the things that you're going to see is trending over time for each of those different engagement levels. So you'll see the no engagement, the low, the medium, the high, the very high over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Right. And the real power of Nucleus actually comes from being able to start applying the different dimensions or the different filters over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And so this will allow me to take a look at my engagement by a number of different dimensions or segments or subgroups of my organization or of my membership. So that if I wanted to go ahead and look at people who are in organizations that are in a particular facility type or correspond to a particular bed size. Remember, we're looking at hospitals, so the bed size is an important dimension for us to look at, or ownership or state. I can go ahead and just check off and filter by, whichever one of those I wanted to use. So if I want to look at hospitals in New York, I just go to the New York filter and check that off. Right, I can close out my filters and you see it updates my visualization here on the left-hand side of the screen. Right, and if I wanted to add in additional filters on top of that, maybe I only want to look at members or prospective members, right? If I'm only looking at members, I want to go ahead and check off the member filter. Again, it will update the visualization over here on the right-hand side of the screen. So the other thing that you can do is go ahead and save your filters. So if there is any particular point in time you want to come back and look at this visualization again, it'll be ready and waiting there for you. So as we scroll down to the bottom of the screen, one of the other things that I want to mention here is that we're looking at it again from a number of different visualization perspectives. But one of the really cool things about Nucleus is that you can actually open up the data table at the bottom of the screen, and that's going to allow you to start looking at the actual organizations and how they're becoming engaged with your organization itself. And so this serves as kind of a live data set. So if I wanted to go ahead and filter this or move around my categories, I can go ahead and do that. One of the key things that 340B Health used this for is that, I'm filtering by the state of New York, but if there was a particular congressional district, and you'll see that's a dimension we're able to filter by here, that I wanted to go ahead and find one of my engaged members. Maybe I want to ask them to call a member of Congress or write a letter or something like that. I can go ahead and filter by my congressional district. Maybe it is New York, Congressional District 27, and I see this is my, highest engaged member in that particular congressional district. So here I can see the company name and whatever that is. So Mount St. Mary's Hospital and Health Center. Maybe that's the prime candidate for me to go ahead and reach out to for a particular ask. Okay, so the other thing too that I want to mention here is that when you look at this level, we're looking at the organizations themselves and the total or the aggregate amount of engagement points that they've received. So the other thing that we can take a look at from this perspective is we can also look at the organizational points by activity. And it might take just a second for it to load up here because it's pulling in all of the data across the different organizations that we're taking a look at here. But one of the things that this will allow you to do is take a look at the individual activities that members are taking a part of. So here you can see they attended a webinar, they opened an email, they attended a conference. And so this really allows you, if you wanted to go ahead and start filtering by those engagement levels, to take a look at those different activities that members in different engagement levels, whether that's medium or low or high, are taking part in, so that you can really start to understand, what does it mean when someone is more engaged or less engaged for your organization. Now, the other thing that I want to mention here, and one of the things that 340B Health utilizes Nucleus for, is that if we change our member status and we look only at our prospective members, right, this will also allow me to take a look at prospective members who have engagement with the organization, right? So if I hop back over to this data table here, and I want to go ahead and figure out, right, who are my most highly engaged prospective members? And in this case, I'm only looking at New York, so there may not be the greatest in total of activity points here, but you'll see, right, if we look at Morris, wait, if this guy is here, if I can go ahead and open this up, Morris Heights Health Center, right, they are a non-member, they're a respective member, but they've engaged with us. At least tells us they've had some type of interest in what we're doing. So maybe they are a prime candidate to reach out to in order to try to obtain a membership. So also from that same perspective, if I wanted to go ahead and look at the members themselves who had zero engagement, and I'm not going to go ahead and ingest a filter, but if I sort by this particular column here, you can see I can also look at people who have zero engagement. So again, if I was looking at members, these are prime candidates for me to reach out to, start talking about our benefits and things like that. So that is from a high level, some of the use cases that 340B Health utilized this for. As Rob mentioned, we are taking a look at this not only on the organization level, but we can take a look at it on the individual level as well. So if I look at individual member engagement here, one of the things that Rob mentioned is that 340B Health uses this as kind of an incentive for their members to be engaged. If they offer a free conference registration and they project this particular analytic right here that shows their most engaged members into their website. So their members are creating a little bit of a gamification and a competition with each other. They're actually calling 340B Health and asking what are additional things that I can do to become more engaged in order to win that free conference registration. Okay, great. So the next example that I'm going to move on to is actually National Association for Healthcare Quality's site. So keep in mind that as we are looking at this particular site, we are looking at the back-end version of it. So we're looking at what National Association for Healthcare Quality can log into Nucleus themselves and see. Keep in mind that when members are looking at this themselves, it's being projected into National Association for Healthcare Quality's website. So members are seeing it branded on their website, and National Association for Healthcare Quality can log into kind of the back-end client side of Nucleus here, where they're able to take a look at different individuals and their engagement scores. So you'll notice over here on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a filter on the carousel level as well. This allows us to pull up a particular individual who has completed the survey. So you can see those names over there on the right-hand side of the screen. But one of the things that I want to show you are the different ways that members are able to then go ahead and organize their self-assessment. or analyze their self-assessment, I mean. So for first and foremost, as you remember, there are 2 different versions of this assessment available on NAHQ's website. So the first is a free version where any member can go in, complete the assessment, and then take a look at how they've performed in different dimensions of their job functions, right? So you'll see each of those dimensions listed here on the carousel view. So you see professional engagement, quality leadership and integration, right? Performance and process improvement. So you see they've kind of put different dimensions of, how you should be performing in a job that relates to healthcare quality and the different types of things that you should be doing. So from the free level, there is an overall assessment score here, where you can go ahead and, again, keep in mind the member themselves would be seeing this view embedded into NAHQ's website. And this is the free version that they would be able to access. So here you can see each of those different dimensions: professional engagement, performance and process improvement. You can see how they've rated themselves, which is this orange dot here, and each of the spans, whether or not that's operational, managerial, or at an executive level, right? And so you're just allowing yourself to see where you fall in kind of the grand scheme of how advanced are my skills in each of these different dimension scores. Okay, so as Rob mentioned in his PowerPoint presentation, NAHQ took this as also a revenue generating opportunity. So they offer an extended version or an upgraded version of being able to analyze how you performed on each of these dimensions on a deeper level. And so when they do that, essentially the things that the members would be seeing on the website are each of these different dimensions and taking a deeper dive into them. So for instance, if I look at professional engagement, I'm able to dive down deeper into that particular dimension, right? And what it's going to show me here at the top of the screen are the dimension scores, total number of respondents that responded to this particular dimension, and the percentile that I fall into as far as where I've been rated and how that compares to other respondents of the assessment. Now, for each of these dimensions individually, you're also going to be able to take a look at the individual questions that were a part of that dimension. So here you can see integrating ethical standards into healthcare quality practice and where I've rated myself in terms of operational, managerial, or executive. Now, in addition to that, it also allows us to take a deeper dive into filtering the assessment by different types of members who have completed the survey. Right, so if I wanted to go ahead, maybe I'm a more junior employee and I want to go ahead and compare myself, how do I perform against C-level or executive members? Maybe that's a goal of mine. I want to eventually move into that particular level of an organization. So I can go ahead and check off that filter here. As you can see, it updates my percentile, and now I can see how I've performed against those particular members. And I can do that by any number of dimensions over here on the right hand side of the screen. So if I have a different primary responsibility, or I want to see how do I compare against people who've been working in this field for over 20 years, right? I can go ahead and filter that off as well. So that's really the way that National Association for Healthcare Quality is utilizing Nucleus in order to provide an additional benefit for their members. Again, keep in mind, I only walked through one of the dimensions here. Each of them has their separate competency statements down here at the bottom of the screen, where the member themselves is able to go in and compare how they perform against like members or unlike members that they're wanting to compare themselves against. Okay, so that is it for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Rob and see if there are any additional questions.
Thanks, Brandon. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to, my colleague Shepard Smith, who's our head of marketing, has been following along with the questions that many of you posted. So I'm going to ask him to read them to me, and I will try and answer them.
Rob, many thanks. And as a reminder, everyone, please continue to submit questions. Rob, the first question: we have some degree of member engagement scoring in our AMS. Please talk more about scoring using other data.
It's interesting. Probably 2 or 3 months ago, we wrote a blog based on some analysis we had done on all of our Nucleus instances of all of our clients' data. And what we found when we looked at everyone's data is that on average, the AMS only makes up 20% of an association's data, and it's shrinking. I mean, in fact, at my old organization, 340B Health, it was actually only about 8%. And the reason for that is that these email systems and these communities generate so much data. You're sending out thousands and thousands of emails that your members are reading and clicking on. they're posting many, many messages in your community. You know, there might be very large surveys that you're sending out that are getting responses. So what that means is that if you're doing scoring, engagement scoring on just the data in your membership, you're actually really missing out on quite a bit of the real activity that's happening with your members and non-members. And so I encourage you to consider doing something where you would be able to bring in all your data, blend it together, and then create an engagement model based on that, because I think you'll get a lot more definitive results. And it really is interesting to compare dimensions of data that are in your AMS against dimensions of data that are in these other systems that you normally can't do.
The next question, should we be concerned about license issues if my members access the analytics?
Well, that's a great question. So, you know, I would say traditionally the answer to that is probably yes. And in fact, in many cases, it might still be yes. So you really need to check. You know, fortunately with our solution, Nucleus, we don't have that issue. So we essentially license our system on an organizational level, so the individuals can, all your users at your organization can use the system, your board members can use the system, and you can project these analytics into your website and all your members can access it. There used to be the same issues with old reporting, like old Crystal reporting too. That was a problem, and I think a number of the analytics solutions like Power BI have licensing restrictions if you want your members to access that data. So I would pay close attention to that to make sure that that isn't a problem.
Thank you, Rob. And question number 3, and we've committed to limit ourselves to 3 questions today, but we'll answer all questions offline. How much training will my staff need?
Well, certainly if you're using our platform, I would say not very much. When we deployed Nucleus, quite frankly, we gave our staff about a half-hour training, because as you saw when Brandon was demoing, there's only about 3 or 4 things you need to know. You know, you need to click the left menu to get to, you know, the carousels of data. You inspect the data in the middle, and if you want to drill a little deeper, your filters appear on the right side. And so there might be, I would suggest that you spend some time with your staff to make sure everybody understands the definitions of the data. You know, if a particular field says member status, you might want to discuss to people, well, what does that actually mean? And that's not all that much different than understanding if it's in your AMS, but I think that that's where the majority of it is. You know, the system was set up so that it really could be used by the most junior membership coordinator up to an executive who generally only spends all their time in email. So it requires very little training. So that was the 3rd question. So we were going to stop there. As Shepard said, we will work to answer all the questions. And so if you want to post a final question, please do, and we will respond to all those with orgCommunity. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. We very much appreciate you taking the time, and we want to especially thank orgCommunity for sponsoring this webinar. They're always putting on great content. We showed you 2 great use cases that can provide member value using a data analytics platform, the member engagement and the member facing analytics. But you know, there are many, many other good use cases, and there's also many different data challenges. So please feel free to contact us if you'd like to discuss your specific challenge or need, because there's many other things that can be done with the data analytics platform to bring value to you and to your members. And as with all webinars, we've recorded this session and we'll send it out to you shortly. So please feel free to share with your colleagues. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.